With OTAs and Minicamp wrapped up, now we get a sense for where the Vikings are at, especially with JJ McCarthy. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. I appreciate my hashtag everydayers so very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, I've got a little bit of catching up to do. There was no show on Friday. My apologies for that. Something personal came up. I couldn't do a show, but we're back. We're here. And I would love to catch you up on what I was going to talk about on Friday, which was the end of OTAs and Minicamp, which means a few things are possible now. For one, we can now sort of get a sense for where the depth chart is, where the position battles are. There are always going to be a couple of little bottom roster moves. Bubba Bolden is released. They bring in a new O-lineman. You can listen to Bubba Bolden's story on a now defunct episode of the Everyman series. You can find, if you're watching on YouTube, there is a playlist, by the way, for the Everyman series. So you can go check that out. It's a fascinating story for how he got to yet another NFL training camp. Was a pretty unlikely one to make the team. So it kind of makes sense that he'd be the guy. But that's not who you're here to listen about, right? It's JJ McCarthy. How is JJ McCarthy looking? So I'm going to get into a couple of fairly detailed points about that, as well as a couple of other like position battle and depth charty things that we can glean. So there's a lot that we can bring from OTAs and Minicamp. Now that the whole thing is over, and I'm sure you've all been watching the 1-minute highlight clips that are all very zoomed in, so you can't tell what's what and what routes are and stuff like that, because Kevin O'Connell's very secretive about all that. But the main topic, of course, is JJ McCarthy. How's he looking? How's the kid? Okay, so here is, I guess, what reporters can tell you. People who've been there all the time. That's not me. But what reporters have been saying is more or less that he looks sharp. Looks fine. Hey, there's maybe a mistake here or there. You coach through it. You don't make the same mistake again. But it's nothing that anybody's at all concerned about. You don't really want perfection in this particular stage of camp because it probably means that he's not limit testing anything. Like it probably means you're going through the motions and maybe not getting much out of this time. So they're still, learning this and that, and that was a little too slow. Oops, he threw it in. There's I think about an interception a day. So that, but very rarely has there been like repeat mistakes. And that's what Kevin O'Connell has sort of emphasized on the podium. Look, you can hear coaches talk about like when their quarterback's not doing great and like compare it. It's different. Kevin O'Connell seems perfectly satisfied with JJ McCarthy, but nobody's going out on a limb and saying anything that could get him in trouble down the line, right? There's still very much, he has not played, so we're not going to say anything crazy. Hey, he looks great for spring, for what we can tell, it's looking fine. It seems like he's basically just met the expectation and probably wouldn't be the story of OTAs at all if it weren't for the context surrounding, 10th overall pick. Everybody's careers are tied to him, right? There was one interesting thing, and then a bunch of clips. The clips we'll get to, but the interesting thing was a very much like community-wide debate about arm strength. This is what I wanted to get into in a lot of detail on Friday. Maybe we'll still do that show on like what it means to have a strong arm as a quarterback. But I believe it stems from a lot of things that like Colin Cowherd or just people like that have said. And McCarthy was even asked about this on the podium. Hey, how do you believe in, what do you think about your arm strength? People say you don't have a strong arm. And he basically was like, yeah, that's probably just because I played at Michigan and we ran a lot. And that's probably all people, which honestly, Cook, like he's probably right. But one of the things that all the beat reporters have put in a notebook at some point, Will Raggets or Matt Collar, the Strib guys or whoever, they've all kind of been like, yeah, man, this dude zips it. That ball comes firing out of his hands. There is velocity on it. So anybody trying to tell you that JJ McCarthy is not a velocity passer, not only does that like underrate his arm strength, but it's also a really bad characterization of JJ McCarthy, because if anything, touch and the lack thereof has been the main critique of JJ McCarthy. At least in my eyes, that's the thing where you find the most misses, and that causes misses on deep passes. And I think a lot of people just look at deep pass miss, must not have a strong arm because he's missing on the longer ones, but that's not at all where arm strength comes up. That's a much more finessey thing. Those long touch passes, I'll tell you a secret right now. Pretty much every NFL quarterback can probably get the ball 50 yards away from where they are standing. Can they do so accurately may be a bit of an arm strength thing, but it's more of a technique thing. And where arm strength comes up is in velocity. Can you zip it into a tight window over the middle, that kind of stuff. And that's always been JJ McCarthy's strength. I will never, ever forget this, okay? And it's funny, Josh Metellus brought up Sean Mannion, which is why it's in my head. But I think this was 2019. Sean Mannion was in the building, and I want to say it was Jake Browning, but that wouldn't have been 20. Maybe it was Kyle Sloter. It was Sean Mannion and somebody who would never have an impact on the Vikings. After practice, they just had a couple of footballs and they had a little throwing contest. They stood on the 40-yard line and threw at the crossbar. This is a 50-yard pass in the air then. And doink, 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 like 6 in a row. And it was Sean Mannion, who is famously, everyone's least favorite backup quarterback ever, could hit that consistently with no pressure, just, lining up and throwing it. You forget what these NFL guys are. Anyways, the arm strength thing is funny. And when it comes to the Colin Cowherd types, I do think that's where it came from. And I think it was Matt Collar kind of got into it with him on Twitter. So here's the thing about Colin Cowherd in particular that you have to remember. Colin Cowherd is a large Sam Darnold defender since 2018, since the draft, since USC and everything. Like, he is like firmly in Sam Darnold's corner, which is why he's super, super positive about the Vikings last year. You might remember being like, this Colin Cowherd guy, maybe he's not so bad, because he was saying what you already want to hear. Which, let's be honest, a lot of people, some of you, this is what you want out of a podcast, okay? I don't want to be too mean about it, but some of you just want a podcast to turn to the camera and tell you an opinion you already have. And Colin Cowherd was doing that for a lot of you when the Vikings were winning a lot of games, and he's a Sam Darnold guy, and he said, look, Sam Darnold's for real, but because they moved on from Sam Darnold, now he thinks the Vikings are stupid for doing that. And in order to justify that position, JJ McCarthy has to be bad. So he's just going to latch on to anything bad that he can find for JJ McCarthy. And it's going to be super bad faith because he's not a serious analyst. So ignore him. Ignore Colin Cowherd. That shouldn't be too hard. Anyways, JJ McCarthy has a lot of arm strength. The touch thing is what we're looking for, right? And some of the beat reporters said, yeah, we're a couple layery throws that actually look kind of nice. Maybe he's improving there. But what I want to focus on, and what I will focus on maybe in more detail later, is some of the mechanical things that I was focusing on last year, the over-rotation, the technique throwing on the run. There's a very particular one that I find fascinating to see. And you can actually go look at a college highlight tape and find one where JJ McCarthy makes a throw on the run to his left. It's a highlight tape, so it will be a good throw. But that's not what I care about. What I want you to do is watch the mechanics of it and how he throws his feet. And then I want you to compare that. I want you to find Dak Prescott in a good year, 2019, I think was a good year for him. He was hurt a lot, but Dak Prescott in a good year highlights. Maybe 2023, whether the second seed, right? Dak Prescott in a good year. And find the same thing, throwing on the run to his left, and look at the difference. And you can even find a difference in Kirk Cousins too, the way he would do it. So what I'm getting at here is, and just watch the way their legs go in it, the way their shoulders go into it. There's kind of two ways to skin a cat here. One's a lot harder, but also has a lot more benefits. And the other one's a lot more consistent, but is going to be slower. So the Kirk Cousins way to do it, or the Michigan JJ McCarthy way to do it, is to recock your shoulders. Essentially, if you're running to your left and you're a right-handed quarterback, you're facing the wrong way, right? So you have to get your body turned all the way around to get your shoulders back lined up to where you're throwing, and then you can kind of hopefully have a semi-normal upper body motion as you do your throwing motion. And hopefully, guys aren't close enough to you where the amount you have to slow down to do that means the throw gets affected or whatever. Hopefully you can get that done, right? And what you want to be able to do is like carve down those sorts of, especially on a rollout. But even in a scramble, you want to kind of carve it back toward the line of scrimmage to almost get a running start, kind of Happy Gilmore logic. But the problem is that's kind of slow. You've got to get your shoulders all the way around before you can even start your throwing motion. And if a window opens and then closes in that time, you could be getting yourself in trouble. The way you want to do it optimally, I think, and it only works if you can do it because it's a lot harder, is to swing your leg out and essentially starfish your legs, jump into the throw, and get torque all the way with just your hips and your shoulders. This is the Dak Prescott way of doing it. He's excellent. I probably should have brought up the gold standard of this, which is Mahomes. Mahomes is the god of this. Find one of Mahomes rolling left. And you'll see that's kind of how he is able to get so much velocity and like find these tight windows while he's rolling to his non-dominant side. Caleb Williams is also like, there's a ton of examples of him doing this. It's one of the things, as much as I'm a hater right now, I'll be honest, some kind of homer reason sometimes. Okay. I'm not sorry, but like, he's good at that. He's really good at that. And he was at USC as well, but there is a clip from Alec Lewis standing where they let media stand. So it's really, really far away. It's kind of hard to see where he kicks his leg out like that. And so it's a different approach to that. And it looks great. It's a good throw too. So like that's something he's been working on. That's the kind of stuff you can find from OTAs with a quarterback. I'm not going to start doing stats and stuff, but you can see the throwing motion and you can try to make conclusions based off of that. There's a lot more going on though, because there's 90 other players because there's an international. There's 90 other players on the roster and there's some interesting goings on elsewhere on the depth chart too. So that'll all be next on Locked On Vikings. This episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime, which is the best place to find your tickets. Look, the playoffs are almost over, but NFL tickets are on sale, including tickets to the international game are now up. Of course, resale to all of the Vikings home games. So whatever it is that you want to get, maybe you want home game against the Eagles, or maybe the Lions game, which is going to be a huge one, or maybe you are going international. Maybe I'll see you there. Find your tickets at Gametimes. You can actually check out their zone deals, which are these really killer deals. No surprise fees on all of this stuff, based on just like, here's an area. If you can get me a seat anywhere in there, then go for it. And this is going to be the price. You can actually get 10% off of exclusive zone deals right now for the FIFA Club World Cup matchup. So if you're into that, go check it out. You can find great seats for NFL games all over the place for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. And you'll always get the best price with fees included. So what you see is what you pay. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Moving along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. So Justin Jefferson being at OTAs was a big thing that all the media wanted to focus on, which feels a little automatic. Everybody was there, even the players who, unless they were either like hurt, but they were still present. Like Will Fries was there, but he was in sweats. And Christian Darrisaw was even there and even did get in for Indos in one day. Or somebody like Josh Metellus, who was there, but limited to only the 11-on-11 stuff. There's a contract thing going on. It's all pretty amicable and it makes sense. Or somebody like Isaiah Rodgers or Brian O'Neill, who would be gone for a day or two here or there, but it's like an excused absence, personal reasons, whatever. But obviously the last couple of years, there's been an active contract negotiation with Justin Jefferson, so he didn't show up to OTAs. This has become the thing to do. This is an incredibly popular move now. You saw it happen in Cincinnati with a couple different people. Anybody who's got a contract thing and doesn't want to get hurt in the middle of their contract thing is not going to come to the voluntary programs and maybe even hold out a mandatory minicamp, which I do not believe Justin Jefferson ever did. A very important distinction there. The voluntary part he did not show up to, but then he came to the involuntary part. This time he came to all of it, and there was even a cute little exchange on the podium with Justin Jefferson, Kevin O'Connell like pretending to be a reporter and saying, well, what did you learn in this spring program? And Justin Jefferson gave some canned answer. And then said, so are you going to be there next year? And Justin Jefferson said, we'll talk about that. It's a cute moment. Everybody's laughing. Everybody's smiling, right? But it does show that there was at least some, I don't even want to say the word disappointment because that's so much more intense than what I'm going for. But it seemed like O'Connell would have been like, hey, man, I wish you would have been there the last couple of years for this. And I'm glad you're here now. So I imagine that if there's not like an active contract negotiation, we probably will see Justin Jefferson show up to these voluntary things. And Justin Jefferson taking on a leadership role in that room has become this very evident thing. Reporters talking about like, you can see Justin Jefferson, bringing up and mentoring and talking a whole bunch to Jalen Naylor and Jordan Addison and even Ty Felton. And the way he talks on the podium and stuff, you can see him sort of coming into his role as the face of the franchise in a more talkative way. Like he's been the face of the franchise for a while. But a lot of what Justin Jefferson has done has been, very, I'm going to do my thing and make myself the best tool for the Vikings that I can possibly be, but not necessarily as communicative with everybody else. And that seems to be a lot more now. Not that it was nothing, but there's a change that everybody has noticed. Interesting to bring up. But in that wide receiver room, it is pretty clear based on the way that Kevin O'Connell, Wes Phillips, and even Justin Jefferson talk on the podium about that room that Jalen Naylor's wide receiver 3 and that it doesn't seem to be that there is going to be much of a competition about it. I am reading between the lines of quotes here. But for one, Jalen Naylor was the guy with the ones, right? So that was nobody was rotating, right? We're not splitting reps with anybody yet, right? Which wouldn't necessarily happen in the spring anyways in the OTA program because it's not an evaluative program, very much like the way Kevin O'Connell has designed it and has been extraordinarily repetitively clear that this is not an evaluative, this is not a competitive part. So there wouldn't be a position battle here necessarily, but Jalen Naylor is at the very least in pole position for that. Camp is long. Lots of things can happen in camp, but Jalen Naylor holds that job. And it's going to be, if there is any, real challenge to his position from Naylor or, if Rondale Moore comes back healthy or anybody else in that room, it's going to have to probably surprise someone. It's going to have to probably mean Jalen Naylor plays poorly in camp, which everybody, it's hard to kind of separate what's a platitude and what isn't, but both reporters and people on the podium said, hey, Speedy had a great spring. He had a great program. We're really happy with him. So he was specifically called out a number of times and seems to be sort of solidifying his hold on that role. Lots can happen, but something pretty proactive is going to happen. It's going to have to really change the status quo for Jalen Naylor not to be wide receiver 3. Elsewhere in that depth chart, elsewhere in the wide receiver room, there's some interesting stuff. I mean, every day kind of has a different guy that made an interesting play, and you go, hey, don't forget about Ja'Shawn Jones, but it's kind of one day where he had a pretty good one. And it usually takes more than that for somebody like that, a futures contract or an undrafted rookie, to truly make the team. You have to kind of see it day in and day out over and over and over and over again and not have it be one random Thursday in the program being oh yeah, Ja'Shawn Jones was a guy today. That doesn't make you the team. And again, that's going to all have to happen in camp. There's plenty of instances of, Holton Hill having a great, really strong spring and then having a whatever camp and being CB4. Long way to go with all this depth chart stuff, but it is also worth noting and kind of circling back on when OTAs started, Donovan Jackson was the unquestioned first team left guard. That has not changed. Christian Darrisaw, of course, got in, replacing Justin School at that tackle position. Blake Brandel playing a little bit on the right, playing a little bit on the left. But with Will Fries out with a broken leg still. So assuming you get Will Fries back and you get that 5 back, that's the first team O-line appears to be pretty set. It does not seem like there's going to be any competition on it, which is probably pretty relieving to people who don't want to see their first round pick, having to fend off Blake Brandel for their job. Seems like that's not the case. You're going to have Darisaw, Donovan Jackson, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, Brian O'Neill. That's the intended offensive line, and we're just waiting for a couple of those guys to come back healthy. Meanwhile, guys like Blake Brandel, Michael Juergens, and Justin School are the depth, and some of those guys can be depth at multiple positions, and then that room is going to be kind of rounded out by one or two other guys that maybe are just there for the field goal unit or maybe aren't even active on game days. In terms of that injury stuff, obviously seeing Christian Darisaw back when we saw him back was pretty big news. I went over that in a previous episode. Also, we got a little bit of clarity on those timelines with Darisaw sort of and Will Fries both sort of targeting the start of camp. We're hoping we can see that whole line when camp starts. And that is a markedly different target date than we've been talking about for pretty much the whole offseason with Christian Darisaw. However, with Will Fries, that seems to be about on the expectation that we had with him. So hopefully you do get those guys back for camp. You just here's your first team O-line, but there still might be a little bit of time of waiting. Maybe they come back in the middle of camp. Maybe they sit out all of camp in the preseason, but they're ready for week 1. And we're just going to do the abundance of caution thing and just sit and wait for a month. That could definitely happen and not necessarily mean that the injury isn't ready or whatever. But what I do know, what I can guarantee you, what I would bet my house on is that they're all going to be really, really cagey about it in the camp. And we're not going to get to know nearly as much as we want to know about it. So be ready for that. There's some other interesting battles going on in the world of special teams and other kind of takeaways from OTAs, random little tidbits of news that are worth going over. So we will get into that next here on Locked On Vikings. Moving right along here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, some other little interesting things that I took from the press conferences, as well as some of the reporting from OTAs. Let's start with the punt return competition. The punt return competition is a little interesting because Isaiah Rodgers is a hot commodity at OTAs. It seems as though Matt Daniels wants Isaiah Rodgers to be his punt returner, evidenced by the fact that he went on the podium and said, I would like Isaiah Rodgers to be my punt returner, but also that Isaiah Rodgers has been the mainstay in all of the days that media was able to report on who the punt returners were. It wasn't always the same group of people, but it always had Isaiah Rodgers and Ty Felton in it. Those seem to be the two principal guys, with Ty Chandler and Isaiah Rodgers being the main kick returners. Of course, Isaiah Rodgers as a returner, lots of experience, maybe part of the reason he was brought in. But if he is slotted in as CB2, which appears to be the case, that he just has that job, he's a starter now for the first time. Go listen to the Everyman series about him. It's, I believe it was the last show that I put up. It was Thursdays. If that's the case, putting him on special teams as a returner, as well as all that cornerback plays, a lot of wear and tear, a lot of injury risk, and there might be a negotiation. There might be a little bit of tension there for, what do we do with this guy? Can I have him as a returner? Do you need him as a corner? Can he do both? And if not, then the position opens up to not only Ty Felton, but Silas Bolden, what was his name? Miles Price, and whoever else they kind of want to maybe throw in there for a day or two. This will come down to, and I kind of think it always ends up coming down to this, whether you like it or not, who catches them the cleanest. If you, the days when I would go to every camp practice, I would fly back to Minnesota. I would be there every single day. We're not going to do that this year, by the way. But back in the days when I would do that, one of the things that you could watch if you decided to go do that, it's $10 a day. So you could, if you were really dedicated, if you had the time, is watch the punt return competition every single time and just make a note anytime someone doesn't perfectly cleanly catch the punt, you will predict the winner of that job every single time. Even when it's surprising, even when an incumbent gets beat, or it's not the draft pick you thought it was, or it's some undrafted rookie that's going to take the job, or wait, Brandon Powell's the guy? He's not that exciting. It's always the guy who catches it clean. That is the first thing. We want no muffs, right? No Jalen Naylor losing it in the sun in Lambeau. None of that crap. And then if you can field it cleanly and fair catch every single time, that is the baseline. And anything else we get on top of that is gravy. That is the mentality. Among a lot of special teams people, it seems like it's Matt Daniels' mentality. And that's why the punt returns have been, the stats on punt return yardage, they're like dead last in yardage because they fair catch every single time. They played it super, super conservative with Brandon Powell. And when he did return, he would always just kind of run forward, take the yards that were there. It was very, very, very conservative. And they might be looking for a little more explosion, but you can't sacrifice ball security for explosiveness. That is a recipe for disaster. You must have ball security and then whatever explosiveness you get after that, then that's great. So as you watch, if you do get to go to a day of camp this year, and I strongly recommend, especially if you have young kids, they have a great program for kids. They've got all kinds of fun games going on, all kinds of cool stuff, autograph lines and everything. It's an awesome kids thing to do on a sunny summer day. And if you do want to go watch a practice, make sure you lock in for the punt returner thing. If you see anyone even so much as bobble it, that might be enough for them to lose the job, even if they are Isaiah Rodgers. If Isaiah Rodgers is a little bit sketchy on catching it, that might be what they need to make that decision to say, well, why don't you just play corner? And then we don't have to worry about this, and Ty Felton gets the return job, or vice versa. It could all happen. Elsewhere in the world of Vikings news, is the Vikings had reached a contract extension with Wes Phillips. This doesn't make a huge difference in terms of anyone's job security, but Wes Phillips isn't going anywhere unless Kevin O'Connell is going anywhere, or unless someone decides to hire him as a head coach after a particularly good offensive output. Matt Nagy him, which I'm going to be honest, I don't think that's the greatest idea, but he does have the benefit of a last name everyone recognizes, and that does help people in this league. That's pretty well documented. Jordan Addison has I think it's a jury selection hearing coming for his DUI trial in California. This is only important to note if you are asking the question, when are we going to learn about a suspension or not? And the answer is probably when the court's thing is all wrapped up. Once the court proceedings are wrapped up, then an extension will be levied, but I do not believe the NFL will hand one down until they know how this is resolved. If they handed down a suspension, but then let's say it did go to trial, let's say he was found not guilty, maybe the officer messed up or something like that, maybe the report was wrong. If anything like that comes out and they've already levied a suspension, they'll look like idiots. And that's the greatest fear the NFL has, is having egg on their face in these kinds of matters. That's the only thing they care about, probably. So they'll probably wait for all that to go down. And of course we are awaiting some contract stuff with Joshua Metellus. That's probably the last one. And we're still probably on trade watch for like a Jalen Ramsey thing, or if you think Jair Alexander's, I still think all that stuff is very much in the cards, but Brian Flores did seem fairly confident in his secondary group, including Theo Jackson. Theo Jackson stepping up, taking over the Cam Bynum role is, he spoke about that as if it were a decision that's already been made. I don't know if he's going to be on the field for every snap to do that, but when he is on the field, it seems like he's going to be the deep safety coverage guy only, kind of. Nobody's only in Brian Flores' defense, but not necessarily the blitz off the edge box safety type that Metellus and Harrison Smith are both going to be. One last little note that doesn't make a huge difference. Ryan Grigson and Demetrius Washington were promoted to assistant general manager positions, from like vice president type positions. That's not, I think, kind of in title only thing. I think it's a sort of acknowledgement of the roles that those guys have. Ryan Grigson has been like a right-hand man to Kwesi the whole time he's been here, and Grigson was a mentor, I think, to Kwesi when those two were together in Cleveland. This was after the Colts debacle of Ryan Grigson. And while he was sort of learning his lessons, Kwesi was learning everything because he was brand new to the whole game, was kind of learning everything alongside him. So they've been tight for a while, and that's why Grigson is here. those promotions are probably not that impactful to the actual organizational structure of the Vikings, but worth mentioning anyways as I do this big news dump, kind of notebook dump episode. But tomorrow is Town Hall Tuesday, so get your questions in. There is a link to a Google form in the show notes or YouTube description to any podcast episode, so go get your questions in and I will answer them, and then we'll continue on with the Everyman series and other various whatever stuff I want to talk about because it's June, and there's nothing you can do about it. You are my hostage. See you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.